the only way we're going to really save science from being so shit right now is if we create more spaces and more funding vehicles for more anarchy.
All right, what's up, everybody? This is Other Life. I am Justin Murphy. I just wanted to let you know that I write a free newsletter to thousands of people every week. It's where I publish my best work, I share events that you can come to, and much more. We have an insane private community around the newsletter, and it's free. Go check it out. Just go to otherlife.co. That's otherlife.co. When you subscribe, I'm going to send you a folder of PDFs that contain all of my personal highlights from a bunch of my favorite books that I've read over the years. So you'll get a million insights after just a few minutes of browsing these PDFs, really. They're really special to me, and I just figured I'd share them with you all. So that's otherlife.co, otherlife.co. All right, Riva. So I think a lot of people in my audience will know a thing or two about you, at least vaguely. It seems like you've had a lot of success in different domains. You've run your own business. You've had important positions at other big businesses. It seems like you're uniquely talented at being able to just go from one thing to the next. You also run your mouth like crazy and seem to get away with it. Is there something unique that you think or do that has allowed you to have this kind of wild career and yet still be successful?
Well, I think first we have to define successful, because lots of the things I've worked on have not worked, right? So like, actually, if I look back at my career, the most successful thing I ever did was build a children's toy shop. And that's not the thing that I'm the most well known for. But if I look back with hindsight now, that was the one that really, I think, potentially brought the most value to the world. But yeah, no, I've definitely jumped around. Like, I went into tech and startups and venture capital, and I went to work at Intel. And then, now I'm thinking about neuroscience. And yeah, people do ask me that a lot. Well, they also just try and figure out if I'm a spy, because they're just like, how do you jump around all these different places? You must be an intelligence agent. And I've always been offended by that, because I'm like, the people who actually read my text messages who could employ me to be a spy must know that I'm not smart enough, because no one's ever actually asked me to be a spy. But no, I think, well, I wrote about this once, but like, imagine having one life and just doing like one thing. Like, it's just so insane to me. Like this, I always wanted to do so many different things, and I could never imagine having one career that lasts my entire life. I have so many interests. And I think one of the ways I've been able to jump around is, and I've said this before, is like what I think is the most beneficial kind of networking and business strategy is literally just having integrity. It's like, if I go into something, say I want to go into venture capital, or I want to go into work at Intel, or get hired by Jim Keller, or any of these things, like I try to be very honest about what I know and what I don't know. I think is very valuable. It's not like I'm going into semiconductors thinking that I have like a extensive background in silicon engineering, but I have like a passion to learn, and I like know what my skill sets are. So when I find a new interest, like for instance now with this neuroscience stuff, like I'm not going to be the person doing the research, but I understand my skills in catalyzing the research that I find. So just being aware of my own skill set, and then just being really curious, like asking good questions. People who are experts in fields like it when you go out and like you've done some research into that area, and then you ask some good, valid questions. And I think that's kind of like, if you look at what Elon Musk has done with his career, like he's jumped into all these different spaces, and he kind of, in my idea, like he figures out the mechanics of a space, right? And then he figures out these kind of catalyst leverage points where he can go use his skill set to do something with it. And on a very like much shitter level, I'm like trying to do the same. But I mean, just for context, half the stuff I've done is like failed. So
interesting. So if
you learn,
it looks like your life has been successful. It seems like you have money. It seems like you're doing quite well. So if a lot of things you do fail, how do you manage to do well anyway?
Well, it matters how you think about failure. Like, I don't think about failure as like, oh no, it's bad. I think of failure as like a data point for you to improve your model in the world to know how to advance next. Like, I set up a venture capital fund, or I tried to, like 24. I was so ridiculously naive. And I had such gumption. I was like, I'm going to raise a $50 million venture fund to invest in AI startups to accelerate science. And I look back at it now, and my model was just off of the world, right? And then afterwards, when things didn't work out the way I wanted it to do, I learned a lot of things. And then I incorporated that into my next stuff. So I was like, okay, well, I now know that I never want to manage other people's money. Because if I have to manage other people's money, that's like your main role as a venture capitalist. Is not what I want to do. I want to deliver capital to projects that I care about. So I learned. I was like, okay, well, I actually don't want to work in venture capital. I'd rather make money separately and make angel investments. So the failure of my venture fund wasn't like a huge barrier in my life. It was just I used that as a thing to just learn from.
Okay, gotcha. And so you go to someone like Jim Keller at Intel and you're like, hey, I want to get a job, hire me. What does that pitch look like?
That's definitely not what happened. I was never like, I want to go work at Intel. Jim Keller is a genius and one of the best mentor I've ever had in my entire life. He's one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. And when he was leaving Tesla, I met him through my venture fund. When he was leaving Tesla to go work at Intel, he said, why don't you come work? And I was like, what am I going to do at Intel? Like, I'll get fired, right? And he made a bet with me that if I lasted more than 3 months, he reckoned I'd be CEO in like 2 years. So on my 3-month anniversary, I was like, damn, I guess you work for me now. But I got 17 HR complaints in 18 months. Like, I'm like not used for the corporate life. But the reason why I went to go work at Intel was I was like, one, I am interested in silicon engineering, but two, I was like, I'll learn a lot from Jim, right? Like how to manage a team. It's 11,000 employees with like a several $1 billion annual budget. To have that experience working directly under someone that I respect that much is not something I would ever turn down.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how I ended up doing that. I wanted the opportunity to learn from
But if your experience was mostly running a toy store and having a failed venture capital firm, how do you make yourself seem like viable for that?
Well, I guess we have to ask him that. But no, when the first time I met Jim, he was the head of hardware at Tesla, and I was doing my venture fund. And I came and we just started chatting, and then we just got on. Like he's such a broad generalist. He's very philosophical, and we had all these cross interests. And the way that his mind works and my mind works, like it would like push each other in the right way to think about things. And I've had a bunch of people in my life just like recognize some skills. I think I've spent a lot of my time thinking about epistemology, so I try and think about how I formulate my beliefs and my arguments. And if you think about thinking a lot, I think that maybe other people who think about thinking a lot recognize that, right? So Jim's like, it doesn't matter that you don't have all the semiconductor knowledge, right? We're going to put you as strategy in the silicon engineering team. The fact that you don't have the biases of the industry is probably extremely valuable because you'll come in and maybe you'll spot stuff and see things. So it's more about that. So the way that I think that like people that have, bonded with me or helped me with my career, it's people who think a lot about thinking. And then when I was at Intel, like I didn't sit and work on silicon engineering designs. It's at a team that big, it's a lot of like politics and strategy and trying to figure out how to make things work. It's just like trying to find random leverage points to, accelerate silicon engineering design. And I do have some technical knowledge from like being involved in the AI space for a while. So it was cool to bring that over. But I remember my first day at Intel because Jim just sent me to like a silicon design workshop. And like I had no idea what was going on. And I thought, oh no, he thinks I like know all this stuff. And then after he laughed and he thought, I just wanted to throw you in. I was like, no, I actually loved it.
Okay, so nice. I love it. So basically have integrity and think a lot about thinking. And if you can really just be a really smart, reflective person with high integrity, you can kind of get yourself into all kinds of big positions. Even if you fail a lot, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I actually really value people who failed in the past because like if you haven't failed on some things that you've done, I mean, my venture fund was like, I had such a plan, right? I was going to do this venture fund, use it to invest in AI to accelerate scientific discovery, then accelerate science, which accelerate my own lifespan. Like I had this whole plan. And when it didn't work, it's like good, right? Because I learned my own naivete on like that my moral of the world was just so shallow. And you understand the complexities of like how industries actually really work. And when you get to that, when you understand how complex systems are, it's going to make you better in at doing everything else.
I know that you're a big fan of the philosopher of science, Feyerabend. Recently at a party, you gave a copy of his book Against Method to everyone at the party. I would love to learn, what was the most important lesson you learned from Feyerabend?
So I read, I've been interested in like how to accelerate science for like a long time. And that was the purpose of our venture fund when I originally set it up, was that we wanted to invest in AI to accelerate research and discovery. So like cloud labs and stuff like this. But I read and I did do some of this at university because I did do philosophy of science as part of my philosophy degree. And I read Feyerabend then. But it's like there are some books where you have to read books at the right time. So I read it at the time. It didn't have a huge effect on me. I read it again a few years ago. I think like 2019, I tweeted about it. And I was like, wow, one of the things I love is that I've gone through this kind of a flow of my trying to understand where the problems are in like why science doesn't at least seem to be as interesting as it was in the early 20 or in, at least like 50, 60 years ago, is that my naivete when I started my venture fund was that I thought that the block to scientific progress was actually funding. I was like, if I just get more money to projects. And I remember Peter Thiel saying to me once, if there were lots of cool projects, I would just be funding them. And I was like, he's just cynical. There's going to be loads. But like, no, he had a point, right? Like, they didn't exist, right? And then I'm like, okay, well, what actually is the problem? And then if you go look at scientific research, which is the thing that Feyerabend points out, it's so linear, right? It's like scientific research, especially in academia, has to like plod along from like the last stage. Like if you look at like the Kuhnian structure of science, it's like you have these different stages of scientific research, and like it's meant to follow on. And the way that universities are set up is like you get a PhD, you follow up from your peers, you're meant to advance on their discoveries. But if you look at the really amazing like paradigm shifts in science, like Galileo couldn't have been peer reviewed, right? Like, it's ridiculous. And the real shifts in science have come from like anarchism, right? From someone who's gone, there is this dogmatic view, this dogmatic assumption of how the world works. And we've got this new point that makes it's not going to fit into the previous paradigm. And Feyerabend saying that we need more epistemological anarchism in science, because if you look at the greatest achievements in science, they have come from people who kind of refuted the current paradigm. And I think we've really come to like a head. I think one of the reasons why it was so good for me, and it was actually Jim who told me to read Feyerabend again like 6 months ago. And we organized the event where we gave everyone the copies of that book. But he told me to read it again because I think during COVID, I definitely I became even more skeptical about the belief, like the epistemology of science, right? And then I reread Feyerabend and I was like, it's so true. Like we have people just subscribing to dogma all the time. So one of the things that's so great about Feyerabend, I recommend anyone to read it because it's not just about science. It's like, how do you have breakthrough thoughts? You have to just allow for anarchy in your mind, like allow for that space. And he gives examples. And one of them I do all the time, which is if you're trying to build an assumption or something or build an argument, just to force yourself to bring in something that's completely surreal. So if you're trying to like build a model of physics, like bring in something like you say to yourself, your argument has to also fit into like parapsychology or like psychic energy or like Scientology or something, just so it forces you to think differently because it puts you in a different mindset. So yeah, it's just a really valuable book. And I think the only way we're going to really save science from being so shit right now is if we create more spaces and more funding vehicles for people to be more, for more anarchy, basically.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, totally. So I want to ask you about something specific. Feyerabend once wrote that major scientific discoveries are not like the discovery of America, where the general nature of the discovered object is already known. Rather, they are like recognizing that one has been dreaming. And if this is true, what commonly held belief, I'm asking you, is really just a false dream that we're going to wake up from soon?
Oh, I mean, I have a lot, but one that one of my biggest kind of changes of something that I used to believe that I've really updated on now is I don't think the brain produces consciousness. Like, it's just so ridiculous. I think that, it's not like I have a firm model. Like lots of people have lots of different arguments, but my current working view is that, it's more like the brain is more like an antenna, and that there's a lot like outside this consciousness. Like, it's just it blows people's minds if you tell them that all observable reality is less than 5% of what's in the universe. And like the rest of it is like the supposed like dark energy and dark matter. Like, we don't have any idea. The idea that we could be arrogant in science is so insane. It's like the brain produces consciousness in the neurons. I'm just like, wow, like this makes no sense. And then the psychic, like some of the psychic phenomenon, I used to think this stuff was bullshit. And one of the reasons why I think this stuff was bullshit in the past is because it gets wrapped under like this, like a lot of spirituality stuff, which I don't like, because I think it's like, I'm not into this like stoicism, like let's make ourselves like weak and all this stuff. So like I've like kind of avoided all of these things. But for instance, I'm reading right now Ben Goertzel, who's actually a great big AI engineer. He wrote a book called Empirical Evidence for Psi. And if you look at the psychic experiments, they're more statistically significant than a lot of the stuff that we take for assumptions. For instance, people take aspirin to reduce the risk of heart disease. The psychic, like if you do look at Gansfield experiments, all this stuff, they're more statistically significant that there's evidence that this stuff works than like aspirin for heart disease, right? But it's so outside of people's scope of thoughts because we name it things like parapsychology, which means outside of normal psychology. I'm like,
right.
What the fuck is normal psychology? Normal psychology is like made up belief narratives, right? So that's I think I think one of the biggest shifts will come. It's also, why I'm skeptical about AI, why I'm skeptical about neuroscience, is that the fundamental way that we think about consciousness seems to me to be completely incorrect.
Okay, fascinating. So you think the brain might just be an antenna? That's not the location of consciousness. And you also think that these fields that are sometimes denigrated with less than flattering terms and descriptors like parapsychology, you think there's more there than most people would suspect?
Yeah, and what's insane is that once you start, this sounds like a catch-22 because people say, well, if you believe it, then you'll see it, right? But once you start getting into the mindset and also like understanding the power of your mind, like, I don't know, like it's like cool. I've seen people do incredible things. And I actually, people say like, if this stuff was real, if people really could have these psychic skills or, have this ability to do things, why aren't they doing more powerful things? And the more I meet more powerful people, the more I realize they have these skills. They just don't tell people.
Okay, fascinating. Well, this is now kind of a popular meme in certain circles, ideas around, esoteric things and the occult. And this kind of stuff actually, although it's still kind of low status in high education, kind of scientific circles, if you look at the masses on the internet, there's huge communities of people interested in things like magic and black magic. And it gets pretty wild, actually. So it sounds like you actually put some possible credence on the fact that maybe really powerful people out there are actually engaging in magic, or how do you think about it? What would you call it?
I just think they know how to do things with their minds that other people, they're more aware of how powerful the mind is. Like if you think about the last 100 years of psychology, we've kind of reduced the mind to be this, like the way we're so materialist now that we've separated the mind from physics, right? Like there's physics and there's like our minds, like somehow they don't interlink, right? And the way I think about physics now is that, who knows what this like dark energy, dark matter is. I think a lot of it might be that it's, somewhat to do with this word consciousness, which I think will eventually disappear when we have better models for these things. But if you think about like quantum physics, right? If you observe things and things can change, and it's like there's already a lot of evidence that minds can change physical reality. And I think the people who are very tapped into that, they understand a lot about the power of intention. And when I used to hear about this stuff when I was younger, I was like, nah, it's so stupid. Like you obviously can't do this because science has been so reductionist in the last 100 years. And then when you start to do it yourself, right? Like I've just seen, like even in my own anecdotal experience, I've been able to do like insane things in the last year, just being more aware of how my mind can interact with physical reality.
Whoa. Okay. So
and I'm not saying like Matilda things.
What's an example?
Okay, I'll give you one. My cousin died a year ago, and on the night when he died, I woke up in like 3 a.m. and I had a panic attack. And like I don't have panic attacks. I'm not a very anxious person. And my heart was like, I was like having this insane palpitations. And I texted my friend and I was like, I'm having like a heart attack. And she was like, just calm down, like you'll be fine. And the next morning I woke up and it was like, your cousin has died from a heart attack, right? And I was like, okay, that's strange. But I kind of put that to one side. 2 weeks ago, same thing happened to me. I was in a friend's house and I couldn't sleep. I was like convulsing. And I was just thinking to myself, someone I know I love is dying right now. I could just tell. And I woke up in the morning and my cousin texted me saying, your aunt died of a heart attack last night. And, when people say this stuff, they like have these premonitions or they have it. It's like, it makes sense to me now that I think of like consciousness more of like an intention network where there are ways in which people are connected. So like those two things are examples to me, and they've been very harrowing. I've only had 2 panic attacks in the last 2 years, and they've both been with people in my family who've had heart attacks, right?
Wow.
So that's one. The other thing is, simple things like setting intention. Like my friend Jessie, who we were talking about, who has that podcast, American Alchemy, his aunt is a therapist. And she said to me like, yo, you should mood board. And I was like, what am I, like an old lady on Pinterest? Like I'm not like a mood boarder. And I made a mood board randomly last summer. And I put some thought into it. And I looked at it again like a month ago, and it is insane. It is insane how much of the things that I put in the mood board, like really specific details, became real. Like it's so strange.
Huh.
I believe a lot in intention now. I'm only starting to undercover, but like some of the people who run the biggest, most successful hedge funds that I know, I mean, they really harness the power of intention.
Wow.
Not Richard.
That's fascinating. Those are really interesting examples. Well, I might have to build a startup all about, harnessing mental power to change physics, and you can lead the seed round maybe.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I ironically have just invested in a group that's doing that.
Okay, cool. I'll look out for that. Maybe we talk a little bit about crypto. Obviously, really interesting and important at the moment. There was a recent essay that you wrote that seemed to suggest that perhaps the blockchain revolution might just end up with former Obama interns pacifying the population with UBI tokens. I'm curious, is that your mental model of how crypto unfolds, or is crypto possibly going to be this kind of massive tsunami that kind of overthrows the entire fraudulent boomer elite and liberates life as we know it?
Well, they can only rule us because they rule our currency, right? So, you know, the thing that excites me the most about crypto is exactly that. It's not even about overthrowing boomer elites. It's bypassing them, right? It's like, you can't control us if we don't care about your currency. Like, I mean, 99% of my money is in crypto. Like, I have very little faith in the short-term and long-term future of the US dollar, like none, right? And if the Federal Reserve doesn't have the stronghold, the state is only powerful because of the dollar, right? So for me, it's not, you know, I used to think that it would like, we'd have this revolution and it might be this like crazy, you know, like shift. I used to be much more cynical that it would be like very, very bad. And now the way I'm seeing it is that the boomer elite are just ruining their currency and everyone's economic situation anyway, because they're so short-termism about it, right? They're just trying to stay in power. And the young people are being radicalized, not because they're going to learn about the Federal Reserve. Like, I spent a bunch of time when I was at university studying Austrian economics. Like, I come from this mindset of being like, you know, like, fuck the Fed, like all of this stuff. But the young people, like, they don't even need to, they're not reading Mises or like, you know, they don't need to go in and learn that. They're becoming Austrian economists just by nature, because they're seeing what's happening a little bit. But I am actually very heartened by how apolitical crypto is. It's not like everyone's like, you know, we care about Republicans and Democrats. It's just like, we have these tools and we want these tools. And Galen from Urbit has this amazing quote, which is, give people the tools and let them organize themselves. How can the US government provide an infrastructure for 330 million people? It's so ridiculous. You could without the internet, when people didn't know about what else was going on in the world. But the cool thing about crypto is that we want to give people the tools to self-organize into whatever structures that they want. It's like, I imagine a future where we can have like city DAOs and, you know, different economic, if people want to experiment with different economic systems, they should be allowed to. So I think it's just going to bypass it. Like, I think that the state is going to become like what happened with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church at one point told us everybody what to do, right? And still now we can't imagine a world, but like we don't really imagine, like the state doesn't have a stronghold on us. But as their power and the dollar and the younger generation comes up, I think they're just going to become weaker and weaker and weaker until it's going to kind of be like the UK monarchy, right? It's like, I don't really care what the Queen says on a day-to-day basis. She's not going to like, she can't execute me anymore. But the young people are just going to be like, what? We don't care what Elizabeth Warren says, you know, like who cares? And I find that I'm very excited by that. I'm very excited.
Right on. Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, you know, blockchains and smart contracts kind of are governments in a way. They are kind of replacement governmental technology. So I see where you're going with that. So I guess you're not as bearish on the social outcomes as you possibly once were. The idea of this possibly becoming kind of co-opted or controlled by the elites, you're not worried about that so much.
I think, well, that article was kind of like a sardonic commentary after the 2020 election. And the reason why I was writing that was that I was like, the original title of that article, which was meant to go in the Spectator, except they didn't allow me to print it, was that the road that progressives were taking us down. So the idea was like, if we keep going down this route, this is what it's going to look like. So that was the context of that piece. It's not what I want to happen. You know, I think there was one bit in the article, it's like, you know, you have to go on the arc to cross climate change. Like Kamala Harris and AOC are there, like just checking if you've ever recycled, you know, like I was like imagining this dystopian future. But you know, there's a lot of crypto stuff, which I find extremely cringe. But at the same time, it's like, you know, I came into this stuff, you know, my, you know, somewhat libertarian in nature because I had such negative experiences with the state at such a young age from going through the welfare system with my mother, that it, you know, very much radicalized me. But it's like, the thing is like, even the stuff that I find cringe, like there was this big party in Vegas last weekend, like this after party NFT event. And I was like, I'm not going to go. Like, I don't care because it's going to bring more adoption to the space. Like I used to be a bit more like, no, it should all be people who like understand Austrian economics. Like, but I was like, no, like I just want there to be a lot of adoption because they're not going to care. Like people don't care about politics or philosophy. If you want widespread adoption of crypto, we've got to hook people in with status and, you know, things that play to the things that they already want. And it'll only serve me as someone who thinks about it more philosophically in the long run.
Right. Yeah, totally. I hear all of that. And I think you own a CryptoPunk, is that right? So do you think that there are going to be these kind of high visibility marquee brands, if you will, that retain value over the long term? Like are CryptoPunks going to be super valuable in 10 years, 20 years, 100 years? Is that what you think or what?
Where is it? Well, I mean, I have a bunch of NFTs. Not loads. I actually, in the whole crypto stuff, like I haven't got, even though I have a CryptoPunk, Crypto Toads and some stuff, like I definitely am not following NFTs that deeply. It's just not something I'm like as philosophically interested in. Plus, I've not been very online for the last year, which has been the real NFT time. But I bought the CryptoPunk. I think that project is cool. There's something about it being like at least somewhat OG in the NFT state. Also, I just liked it because like we were in my ex-boyfriend and I were in Monte Carlo, and I was like smoking a cigarette on the terrace, and this like CryptoPunk came up that like looked exactly like me, and I was just like, "Yo, we should just buy this." And like we're kind of stoned, and we thought it was funny. So it wasn't like some like philosophical idea.
Okay.
And I bought the Crypto Toads because I thought they were funny too. But I also bought like the Funks, Ryder Rips's project, which like everyone like aggressively thinks is negative to CryptoPunk. It's like I just on that stuff, I'm at the core of it, I'm still like a 13-year-old Reddit boy in terms of taste. So yeah, it wasn't some deep philosophical stuff like Squiggle DAO and stuff. When it's like $800,000 for a squiggle, like you really lost me there. I just like can't.
Right. What about Milady? Do you own a Milady?
I mean, I've been so offline, and then like the Tiro guys pilled me on the Milady stuff, and yeah, was it Romalia, the website? I was like, this is cool. I mean, this has got a bit more of like the cypherpunk mentality, which I really appreciate. Like all this kind of NFT people like raising venture funds. I'm like, it's kind of lame. Like,
yeah,
it's not in the spirit of crypto, right? Like, but again, for the sake of long-term adoption, I don't mind. Like I've become less I've become less binary on like it having to be like a philosophical fit.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Very interesting perspective on NFTs. You mentioned, or I mentioned, Miladies. So the Vermilia Collective is on Urbit. That kind of brings us to another topic I wanted to ask you about. What do you think is what is currently the most interesting and exciting emerging technology, and why is it Urbit?
Well, you're saying this to the right person because I am an advisor for Urbit. I have been since 2015. I think it's like me and Joey Krug from Pantera and maybe a couple of others. But the reason why I got interested in Urbit in the first place was one of the same reasons why I actually got interested in Augur, which is if you look at crypto, there are not many people actually trying to build decentralized products, right? Not philosophically and not technically either. And if you're building like a somewhat decentralized product on a centralized stack, I mean, it's not very ambitious, and it's in a future which seems to be going towards more censorship. It's not censorship resistant either. And the genius of Curtis Yarvin is that he picked this up very early. Like he started building Urbit like 12, 13 years ago, like a long time ago. And I think it's because he's like one of the first people to experience censorship. So like he realized like we've got to think about this very philosophically. And the thing about Urbit is they don't get it until they need it. And I think people go like, why do you need a decentralized Slack? Why do you need decentralized chat? And it's because we're going towards needing these things, but like maybe the current stuff isn't too bad that people want to make people move over. Urbit has its own issues in terms of like UX and stuff to handle to like be more user friendly, and they're working on that. But philosophically, they've built something genuinely censorship resistant, and they've thought about it like all the way down, like right to the they build their own operating system. Like that is a huge technical feat. So the only truly decentralized project in my mind, I mean, there's probably others, but like that thought about it at that level is Urbit. So if you care about crypto, you should want Urbit to succeed, because if we're going like, who knows what happens in the midterms in 2024? Like, who knows, like with Twitter, like I've been suspended off Twitter twice for such bullshit. We might really, really need Urbit. I also think we might really, really need Augur, because they are truly people trying to think about, decentralized prediction art markets and decentralized, a social suite, decentralized tools.
What is the name of the group you were just saying? Orga? I'm not familiar.
Augur was cool because it was like the first ICO, or the first Ethereum ICO that was building decentralized prediction markets. So doing like betting and gambling, and like Joey Krug, who was my old roommate at the time, and my ex-boyfriend also worked there. So like I got, one of the reasons why I found Augur very interesting, and it's an overlap I think with people who like both Augur and Urbit, was that, prediction markets and gambling, like there are already stuff that, I mean, it's weird for me because gambling's not illegal in the UK, but it's illegal here. Like, I'm like, why can't I just bet on shit? Right?
Yeah. You're saying auger. Sorry. I actually lived in Britain for 5 years, but I still can't hear certain things. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
Auger.
Yeah. So
right.
Auger. Yes. Auger. So, you in England, you can gamble, and I don't gamble, like, actually, ironically, because I am in Vegas right now, like, I'm not like a huge gambler, but I do love betting on politics. So I bet it a lot during all the elections. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, I have to go and predict it, which is basically run by, like, I don't know, some sort of intelligence agency. And it's like wisdom of a crowd, like give to the Democratic Party or something. And like my limit is like $800. I'm like, this is unfair. So like things like Augur and, other people trying to build decentralized prediction markets were an interesting use of crypto because they're trying to build decentralized products to bypass US regulation, right? Or like to create other optionality. And I thought that was a very interesting product, but too early,
Right.
It's like just too early.
Does your history of politics betting have a positive ROI?
People don't understand political betting because when I got into the nature of like making my predictions public. And before 2020, I was like, I'm buying all the like, yes, Trump shares, right? And then when Trump lost, they were like, like you lost money. I'm like, no, you idiot. The cool thing about this stuff is that the way that, like the betting companies like work out how much to sell these things for is, look at the polls, and the polls are ridiculous. It's like on the day of like the election, the fucking incumbent president is like 7%. It's like, it's so ridiculously underpriced. You could buy it on the day of the election. You could buy like yes Trump for like 7 cents. Like, I think it was like 18 cents actually, and sell it like one day when some of the results started coming in, everyone's models were off. Like we were like selling it for like 73 cents a share, right? So you're just like basically just trading out. It's right. Not a binary thing. It's not like you're like waiting. So I was like, Trump is massively undervalued right now because all the polls are wrong, and all the polls are run by like democratically led. Like ABC News owns 538, and everyone's like, why does Nate Silver say XYZ? It's like, well, his boss, no, he's owned by Disney. It's like Bob Iger, like he was going to be a Democratic presidential nominee, So it's like, you just can't trust any of this. So you just want to bet against the polls. So I bet against, and the other thing I made money on, which was so ridiculous, is that Biden was not in the running for being the Democratic representative. He was not. He was massively undervalued for that. Even he was lower than Pete Buttigieg at the time. So I also bought into Biden doing that. So I just bet against the news. I really enjoyed 2020 and 2019 for that. It was fun.
Okay, nice. So going back to Urbit, it sounds like your mental model of how Urbit wins is basically that increasingly people will find that they need it more and more over time. That's kind of how you see Urbit growing and winning in the long run.
People are going to realize that you can't have like everyone's like, why did Twitter do this? Like, why did Robinhood do this? It's like, well, they're like owned by like, big funds that are like totally, work very closely with the state. Like they don't have a choice. It's not like Jack Dorsey, like the Robinhood CEO is just there being like, what we're going to do? We're going to fuck over our users. Like, they're probably quite cool people, but you don't have a choice unless the thing is actually decentralized. Like,
right.
You have to, you have shareholders, you have, you work with regulatory opposite, groups. And the thing about Urbit is they built from the very beginning protection from having to do that. And I think that that's going to make it very interesting because people are going to realize over time that as the state, loses their stronghold with the dollar, I imagine they're going to increase their stronghold on a lot more other things. Like in my mind, America is like slowly becoming North Korea. Like you say this to Americans, they like hate you for saying this, but it's like ridiculous, right? Like the idea that we live in the land of the free. I mean, everyone has to get over this now. Like this is like America used to be the land of the free. It's not the land of the free anymore. And in my mind, something like Urbit is actually the land of the free because it's not that Curtis or Galen or anyone on the Urbit team can like do anything. They're giving you the tools and they're saying, you can do whatever you want. Here are the tools to go organize yourselves. And that philosophically, I think, will catch on more as people realize how bad the alternatives are.
Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein really killed himself?
No, Jeffrey Epstein is alive. Oh, for sure. Like he's
still alive. Where is he? In Cuba with Tupac and the dinosaurs or what?
I have no idea. But the idea that here's the thing. My only model of politics is I am just so humble about how much I don't know, which is not the average person. The average person is like, well, the news told me this. And I'm like, I mean, come on. Like you're never going to actually know, like in a Machiavellian sense, what's happening behind the scenes. And then there are these little things that happen that make no sense, right? And everyone's like, we have to fit this into the world model that we have that's been given to us by the news. And I'm just like, I have no idea. Like it seems very clear that Epstein stuff was somewhat playing on a much, much higher level around like intelligence agency world. Like who knows, right? That stuff is not going to be easily revealed, right? And is Epstein dead or alive? Like, I'm humble enough to know. I just don't know. But my guess would be that he's a very important asset for some people, and that, like it's like John McAfee. You think John McAfee killed himself? Like, absolutely no way.
You think he's still
He's
alive?
such a badass.
Well,
I hope if there's one person who could get out of a Spanish prison and be alive and not even tell his wife or anything, it's fucking John McAfee. That guy is dope.
I agree with all of that, but I feel like precisely for those reasons, he would never just stop, acting in public. That seems like out of character for him. So I have a hard time understanding.
If the alternative is prison, right, then who knows? Like, I don't know. All I'm going to say is, like, on the Epstein McAfee stuff is, like, I just don't. Like, the real humble thing is to be aware that the world, like, there's that Michael Hoffman book, what is it called? Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Such a good book. But it's like the idea that we understand what's happening at a very top level as, like, serfs, right? And I think about this, the analogy is when I worked at Intel. Because you work at Intel, you're like, all the employees, like, think that we're working towards something, and then, like, the C-suite are, like, actually, doing something else, and then the board have, like, other goals, right? And it's like there's, like, some sort of symbiosis between every level. But I didn't really understand this concept of the deep state until I worked in a 100,000 person organization. And I was like, okay, well, there's actually like a strategy going on that, like, it's not efficient for everybody to know the whole strategy, right? You just got to give people little parts so that they can do the bits that they need to do. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, well, this is how the rest of the world works, right? Because it's actually the most efficient thing is there to be a narrative at every level. So, like, the stuff about politics, I'm just very humble that I just don't know.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. But you don't believe he killed himself. It's one thing to not know things, but you also have to be equally incredulous towards what they say is true.
The thing that really threw me was, did you see the Epstein suicide note on 60 Minutes?
I forget. Tell me.
Yeah, because, like, it was somewhat believable, perhaps, maybe. Apart from, like, the guys were asleep and the cameras didn't work. Like, sometimes when I just, like, tell people outside the US, because, like, people outside the US, like, my goddaughter came to visit and I was telling her the Epstein story. As I was telling it, I realized, like, how ridiculous it was. Like, she's like 18, could not stop laughing. But it was really the suicide note that got me. It's like only 60 Minutes had the exclusive with the suicide note, which I thought was believable. But the suicide note was like, he'd written this, like, jumbled text, like, food is bad, like, can't shower, like, something like that, like, time to die or something like this. I was just like, come on. Like, it's like, only 60 Minutes has this, like, suicide note that, like, comes from an extremely smart man who'd been on the phone to his, like, girlfriend the day before. And, like, I don't know, it makes no sense. The elite circles move in interesting ways.
Right.
Idea.
All right. I love it. So on this podcast, we sometimes play a little game called Based or Cringe. I'm going to give you a concept, a topic, a person, a theme, and I don't want to hear your nuanced, interesting, sophisticated takes. I want to hear just yes or no, up or down, based or cringe. Based meaning yes, cringe meaning no, essentially. So are you ready?
Yeah.
So you studied philosophy at UCL. What do you make of the philosophy of Nick Land? Based or cringe?
Based.
All right. Anything to say about Nick Land, or just keep going?
You just told me not to add nuance, so I was trying not to add nuance.
I know that I always break my own rule. I want to know what people think.
Well, I read a lot of his stuff, like, a while back, and I was like, accelerationism stuff is, like, nihilistic, and now I'm just like, nah. Like, I understand the minds. It's not actually nihilistic. I just want to get to the next thing now.
Okay.
And I used to be a little bit more naive about that.
Okay. How about the now common practice or fashion of polyamory?
Cringe.
How about Martin Shkreli, aka Pharma Bro?
Based.
How about the Bay Area meme / sociology of rationalism?
Oh, extremely cringe.
Say more about that.
I mean, I gave a talk at one of the first EA Global, it was very much involved with the rationalist groups. I gave a talk about the value of rationality. I mean, you just heard my pitch about epistemological anarchism. Like, I basically think that the rationalist movement was like a support group for, like, people on the spectrum in Berkeley. That's my view.
Okay. How about Billie Eilish?
Oh, cringe. Yeah.
Cringe? Mm-hmm. How about Jeremy Bentham?
Yeah, I mean, he's based. I mean, his dead body is, like, in our university. I thought it was so cool. Yes, I was like that. I used to walk past. I think they like closed it now. Like even UCL, which was like one of the first free thinking university in England, like came after Oxford and Cambridge, allowed women to come in, set up by 3 philosophers. Like even now, that's becoming woke. And apparently, they were like hiding his body because they thought it was offensive or something. I was like, that literally was his dying request. And I thought it was so cool to like walk past his like stuffed corpse every day when I went to the philosophy department. I was like, what a dude.
Would you sit with him and spend time with his dead body, kind of meditating or reflecting?
You know, I have to be extremely honest. I barely attended university, so no. But the times when I did go in to do my exams, I definitely did say hi to him.
So you were cutting class a lot. What were you doing when you were cutting class?
Running my toy store. So I put all my lectures. I focus very much on epistemology, and I put all my lectures on a Thursday, so that I would only miss one day of running the toy store. But I still like finished and got my degree. Like I think it's such a people always presume I must have dropped out or did something, but I did the whole time. I was already so interested in philosophy that I didn't need to go to the class. I was like reading it all. Actually, in the toy store, the window of our toy shop just had teddy bears reading like Heidegger and stuff. So
okay, nice. Okay, I got distracted. Wet brain.
Oh, based.
Based.
I love this.
All right, and finally, Elizabeth Holmes.
Oh, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna side with cringe because when I read the stuff in the court case with the text messages and all that stuff, I was like, nah, I kind of thought you were cool and like this stronghold, but like she not apologized, but like it's weird now. Like Shkreli is cool to me because like he's consistent and he actually didn't do anything bad. He didn't do anything that Farmer isn't doing the whole time anyway. Me and George Hotz and a bunch of friends actually protested outside Twitter when Shkreli got banned. Yeah, Elizabeth Holmes. No, I'm not clear. And to be honest, I didn't follow it so deeply because I wasn't.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I have a soft spot in my heart for Elizabeth Holmes. I think she probably is guilty of fraud, but I like her, and I think I think she's kind of an interesting example of what you were saying earlier in the conversation about believing that you can basically bend physics to your will. I think she kind of believed that, and that's pretty based.
Yeah, I also think that she's just a scapegoat. Like the idea that it could all be her fault, right? And the same thing for Shkreli and stuff like that. Like we have to have these like scapegoats that we like sacrifice, like they're like the morally bad people in the world. But what she did compared to like hundreds of other companies that exist on a day-to-day basis is like not any better or any worse. If anything, she should have just never apologized and been like, "Fuck you," and I'd been like, "That's cool."
What did you write so that's the end of that game. Thank you. What did you write your undergrad dissertation about? I was curious.
Well, I did 2. You're only meant to do 1, but I decided to submit 2. And I was very obviously interested in political philosophy. And my main university dissertation was called Justifying a Minimal State. So it was like, Nozick and it was a lot of Austrian economics, but basically just, arguing very much that we should have a minimal state. So like it really was a great feeder for me to enter the Bay Area because like I'd come from a very libertarian mindset when I'd been at university. But the other paper that I also submitted was on Plato and love. It was like focusing on Plato's Symposium. Because I always had like these 2 things in my mind. Like I can't be political without being creative. Like even though you weren't meant to do 2 dissertations, I did 2 anyway because I just like I wanted to write about political philosophy, but I love like reading about all the Platonic ideas of love. Like he has like 7 different types, and I just wanted to do a second essay. So yeah, 2 I did 2.
Right. So I noticed that love is something you've written about in some of your past essays. Something caught my eye where you said that love destroys people like alcohol destroys people. But then later in the essay, you seem to also kind of say that maybe it is possible to love without being destroyed. So which one is it?
I think in the essay I was saying like one of the things I found interesting is that when I'm like really close with someone and like actually my friend said this before. I said, "How do you know you're in love with someone?" And she said, "Because I'm no longer afraid," which I really liked. And maybe is it possible for love to not destroy you? I mean, eventually, right? Because like even if you love someone, they're going to die. Like there's always a sense of loss eventually. Yeah, I don't know. It's not like it's something I'm still trying to figure out. It's
fair enough.
So that's why I did the essay. That's why I did the essay on Plato because my favorite quote actually about love is from Ayn Rand, which is surprising, but she wrote a quote which is in the Fountainhead says. How can you say I love you until you know what the I is? And I love that quote because I think most people who go into relationships, they go into it because they need somebody else, right? To like balance them out. And the best relationships I know, like I love Jim and his wife and some other older older friends that I have, like they're two very individualistic people who have this like shared experience. Like maybe in those situations they don't have to get burned.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Interesting. I'm just curious. You mentioned that in your toy store, you had the toys in the front reading Heidegger. So I'm curious what you've learned from Heidegger. Do you agree with Heidegger's theory of technology, where modern technology is this like all-consuming cybernetic system that wants to entrap human being and turn it into objects to be manipulated? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, it's an interesting time to ask me, because I've gone from like the transhumanism arc. I've gone through the transhumanism to Ted Kaczynski arc very quickly. It's like,
is that right?
When I first came to San Francisco, I gave all of these talks about transhumanism, right? Like I was actually what I was known for when I came to the Bay. Is like I'd run this group in Berlin called Berlin Singularity, where we talked about like longevity, extreme life extension. I was working with like David Pierce, the philosopher set up a neuroethics group, and I was working with him about how do we think about like human enhancement, and very technology focused. And the more I got into this space and the more my world model kind of like evolved, I become much, Heideggerian, like perhaps not. I agree with almost everything in the Unabomber Monarch Manifesto. Like it's like he's a genius. I think because who knows if he actually sent the mail bombs, but very, very smart guy who saw a lot about what would happen in the future. But I don't know who actually said this originally, because Jesse mentioned it on the podcast I did with him. But it's about like how every piece of technology, maybe it was Marshall McLuhan, but like every medium of technology is an amputation of the human, right? Like
a prosthesis.
Yeah. Is that McLuhan who said that? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. So I do remember it correctly. So he was, and I get that now, right? Like you used to be able to like follow a map, and now you need Google Maps, and you used to be able to do all these things. Like we're outsourcing it all. And I have become more human-centered. Now I do still want there to be, life. I care very much about I've cared about the longevity space since I was a teenager. So I do want, but I don't think of that as transhumanism necessarily as technology. Like even the founding fathers would want our health to be better, and that technology is the best way to improve these things. But the idea, like actually Kevin Kelly's views and what technology wants are very interesting, because he thinks of technology as this like other kingdom of life, right? And that we're like building this technium. And I found that interesting because then, people who are interacting with this need to be more philosophical and like need to be more ethical in how they think about it, because it's much more powerful as how it shapes society. So I don't want to just go live in a cabin. I don't actually, sometimes I do, but like, I do think it's important that people who are in these spaces come in it also who value the human spirit, right? Like I do want to enhance humans, but I don't want us to lose our, like people are not getting happier with these things.
Right. Interesting. That's very interesting how you describe your path from transhumanist to Kaczynskiite. That's a major transformation, it seems.
Yeah. I still want, I'm somewhere in the middle of both. Like maybe that just makes me an NPC. But like, I do want some of the end goals of transhumanism in terms of, I do want people to be happier. But like so here's something that I take away, like the idea that we should just change, David Pierce sometimes goes towards negative utilitarianism, which is definitely not, I hate any type of utilitarianism. But
you said Jeremy Bentham is based.
Jeremy Bentham is based because he put his dead body in the thing, but he did ruin philosophy with utilitarianism. Like the idea that we have like this like toddler socialist math, like calculate like happiness is so ridiculous to me.
You were saying utilitarianism is cringe.
David Pierce and the idea that we want to change people's hedonic set points, right? So that they don't experience extreme suffering. Now, there's a great book, I think it's called like The Genius of Madness, right? Which is like, it's not the neurotypical people who do great things in this world. If we just knocked out all of mental health issues or like change, like knocked out on a gene level, like any kind of neurodiversity, it'd be very bad, right? So understanding the value of like this kind of diversity and, the people who experience the lowest lows experience the highest highs. Like everyone's like, Kanye's gone crazy. I'm like, no, Kanye's a genius. Like there's a reason he can do the things he can do and have that power. And Alexander the Great was probably bipolar, and like, Virginia Woolf, like, do I want them to like be accountants? Like, not really. You've got to think about all this stuff, the transhumanist stuff about like changing hedonic set points. You just got to calculate in like what the second order effects would be if we try to over optimize for things, which is what people like. This is the thing I hate about Silicon Valley. Like when you go to conferences now, one of the opening questions you get is like, what are you optimizing for? And I'm like, oh, I hate it,
Yeah, I said recently.
Everything has to be overly optimized for like something. like a lot of nature is optimizing for the right reasons. Like nature is very smart.
Goals and planning and optimization. It's very middle of the bell curve. Like the truly powerful have no time for it. You just live. Optimize.
Yeah, which is my argument against the rationalist community, right? Because the people who are really doing exceptional things, they might be thinking about thinking, but they're not trying to, like, I don't know, confine it into some sort of system. And I'll say one thing I did get very strongly from the rationalist community, which I am very grateful for, is that they really taught me about Bayesian epistemology, which I didn't do a lot in university, but understanding stuff in terms of probabilities and your priors and adding a probability to it to be able to update later is a very good way of like thinking through arguments. And I am very grateful actually I got that from the people who are involved at CFAR. So, but to only index on that would be ridiculous, right? Right. So I use that when I need to, but the rest of the time I'm trying to be like Feyerabend.
Hell yeah, I like it. So Bayes' rule is based, Kanye is based, but not too much Bayes' rule. I would love to learn a little bit more about, what you find most interesting right now. How are you spending your time? What are you working on right now?
Yeah, so I stopped working at Intel in June 2020. June 2020. And my dad got sick and he passed away. I actually don't like the term passed away. I feel like people who just like force you to say it. But my father died in January 2021. And I said to myself, you know what? I had to work a lot since I was 16 because I had to financially provide for my family. And my dad had like a lot of carers and help and stuff. So I suddenly was like, okay, well, I have surplus money now and I have like the freedom of not caring full time for somebody. So I'm going to take a year off and I'm not going to allow anyone to pay me to do anything. I'm just going to see where my mind goes in terms of my own interests. And it's a very interesting thought experiment to give to yourself because who are you without the world telling you who you should be, right? Like, who are you if you remove the internet, remove social media and just like say, like, I'm just going to go research stuff. I spent all of last year just traveling, trying to not be online that much and just see where my mind took me in terms of interest. And, I always go back to the same things, which is like science and epistemology. Like, they always just come back to them. And I was collecting all my articles from the last few years, like they all have the same theme. And I was like, okay, well, if you reread Feyerabend, what could I do with the next few years of my life that could contribute towards the acceleration of science and things that I care about? And one of the things I picked up on was, I think some of the views around like infectious diseases are wrong. So they had a lot of hype right now because of COVID. But, I worked with a virologist before viruses were even cool. Like 4 or 5 years ago when I was in London, I worked with a virologist to get like a blueprint of like every antibody I had to like look at my disease, like what diseases I've been exposed to. Because there's a lot of correlation between being exposed to endemic, like diseases that are now endemic with like later issues in life. So there was a paper that came out that, really made the rounds about 2 months ago about how Epstein-Barr virus, which is monoglandular fever, like has a very strong link to multiple sclerosis later in life. And there's this one evolutionary biologist called Paul Feyerabend that I love. And he's been saying for a long time, like cancers and a lot of this stuff seems to be coming from earlier exposure to pathogens. And I've been interested in toxoplasmosis. So toxoplasmosis, have you heard of it? It's like the parasite that you get from cats, and that's where the crazy cat lady idea came from. And my mum is schizophrenic and has spent all her time looking after cats. So I was always convinced when I was younger that she had toxoplasmosis-induced schizophrenia. And the more I started looking at toxoplasmosis last year, the more I was like, this is insane. Like, up to 2/3 of people like have this parasite in their brain, which is like latent, which is basically changing their everyday behavior, right? And now I think of my mind, like my agency is the in-between of like pathogen damage. And then the more you go look at this stuff, if you look at breast cancer tissue samples, it's more statistically significant that they have EBV exposure than even genetics. And everyone thinks of cancer as being very genetically focused. So the more I started looking at that, the more I'm taking the Feyerabend approach, which is that we seem to be wrong about how we think about infectious diseases and how they affect the brain. Alzheimer's there's a lot of research that shows that Alzheimer's could be a prion. It could be coming from prions, like misfolded proteins, which is why surgeons and people who are around people who have Alzheimer's, it might be getting it by like contagiously. Like, it's so insane. So, and if this is correct, then science is going in the wrong direction. Not in the wrong direction, but we're at least overlooking it slightly. So for the last few months, I've just been working on neuroimmunology. I'm setting up this like research foundation, not to do the research myself, but I realized that this is an overlooked area of science that what I'm doing right now is I'm getting researchers to write an explicit list of like people who already think directionally this way, an explicit list of what we would like people to work on. And I'm putting like a bounty price. Like we're waiting like how valuable this research would be. I'm just going to put it out as a research foundation saying like, you want $200,000? We want this data. And I think it'll just be very interesting to bring that. Like if it's even if it's like Paul Ewald thinks that like 80% of cancer comes from infectious diseases. Even if it's 10%, that's huge, right? So I just want to fund that. So I've really been working on that for like the last 6 months or so. I'm going to launch the foundation in mid-May.
Fascinating. So I'm curious how you think about the challenges of designing research funding. What does Feyerabend teach you about optimizing or creating a pluralistic, anarchistic kind of research design context or environment?
Yeah, it's actually really funny because I have a book here. Well, I can't see it, but it's like the methodology of scientific research programs. It's not actually Feyerabend. It's Imre Lakatos. It's like the guy who so Feyerabend's Against Method was actually a dialogue with another guy, and this other guy has written all this stuff about design. I spent a lot of time reading about designing scientific funding vehicles. And one of the reasons why I've gone to this bounty approach is there's two things. One, when you go and try and raise money for like a foundation, like people pitch me for nonprofits all the time. I'm like, where is this money going? Actually, one of my best friends from university runs a company that just audits charities, right? And like they're pretty bad. Like it's just like goes towards like, bureaucracy. So one of the reasons why I've thought about it as this model of like just pricing it as bounties is that not only can someone give money to the research foundation, but it's a very, accountable thing. Like you can say like, I want to fund this one research area. And it's like, here's a breakdown of the cost and this is where the money is going to go. I'm going to do this as a bounty and this is how valuable it is to the space. So I'm trying to add transparency to this and have it more of like a software model. Because the people who I want to raise from, like the people who've made money from crypto, like they think like this. We think very systematically. That's what got us interested in things like the blockchain. So you can't just go around and be like, we want to raise millions of dollars for this like secret nonprofit. We're not going to tell you where the money goes. I want it to be very, very clear. I want there to be, very specific points we want researchers to go out and do. And the other thing doesn't have to be in the US. The cost to do research is extremely expensive in the US. There's a lot of bureaucracy here. If there's 20 kids in India who want to go dissect mice for me to like understand how linoleic acid plays in toxoplasmosis, I'll give them the best funding of their lives. And the bounty model is just what we're starting with. I think we're going to learn from that as well. And again, like we're asking for very specific data, very specific questions. And then how the people go about it might surprise us, right? And that's the Feyerabend approach. I'm not saying like you have to do it a certain way or you have to do this research. I found crazy research recently by like reading stuff that's outside the US. Then I have to like translate it, which is hard. But yeah, no, I'm definitely going to try.
Fascinating. Okay, so you think there are a lot of opportunities in neuroimmunology, and you think there are these kind of alternative theories of disease that are systematically neglected, and you want to build a research organization that basically throws funding in a kind of structured anarchistic way to optimize for research on these neglected areas. Anything else you're working on, or things that you're particularly interested in at the moment?
It's like I can never do one thing, right? Like I just can't. Like if I only work on the neuroimmunology stuff, like I have this like you can't see my apartment. You can kind of see my apartment, but my apartment is insane, right? Like it's like my art project in here. And I have an art studio downstairs, like I paint. So it's like I have this creative side, I have to do stuff. So one of the other goals I have, so you have this problem, which is that I think there are different areas of science which aren't like that aren't on the right structure to get the information that I would like to learn about. The other problem is that we have a massive crisis in self-efficacy. It's like people don't believe that they can achieve things. And I've thought about this a lot. I'm like, how do we make people realize their own power, right? Like how do we make people be more ambitious? Like where are all the John Galts of this world? There's a few. Like I don't think Elon Musk has insecurity issues when he goes and taps into a new industry. Like he thinks of it as like a game. And when you talk to people, they're like, well, this expert says this, or like, I don't have this skill, like blah, blah, blah. And I want to find a way, especially with the younger generations, to instill a higher level of self-efficacy in them. So one of the projects I've been working on for like the last, it's like 2 years now because it's been so complicated, is that I got one of my favorite authors, who I won't name because he's been writing under a pseudonym, but we've rewritten Atlas Shrugged as a TV series. So it's like a 13 episode, 1 hour each, and it's very well done. Like the movies not do it justice. I don't think it works as a movie because it's very long text. It's like a very sexy Mad Men style version of Atlas Shrugged. It's very well done. And the reason why I want this thing to work is that I want young people to watch this TV show and be like, I want to be like John Galt or Hank Reardon or Dagny Taggart, right? I don't want to just be on TikTok being like, I want to be like Kim Kardashian. The way that we inspire the next generation is not by telling them or like writing long articles about how they need to have self-efficacy. We need to give them examples. So if you think about it, like what brought more people into working in technology? I don't think it was like Mark Andreessen's blog post. It was like The Social Network, the movie, because you just see this nerdy kid makes money and gets laid. And then everyone's like, shit, I should go into this industry. So I want to create these archetypes, which is what Ayn Rand was doing, that young people will want to look up to in a very sexy, like attractive way. So I've been working on that for a long time, but the rights and the estate, like, it's been so complicated. And the joke is that I'm like, if it takes any longer, I'm just going to create a documentary about me trying to make Atlas Shrugged, the TV series. It'll just be like the analogous story anyway, because like I'll be Dagny Taggart trying to make it. But it's like fine. It's like, I know, but something's definitely going to happen. But yeah, I've been working on that for like over a year and a half now.
Wow. Okay. That's a fascinating idea. Well, hopefully some Netflix executive is watching this and will hit you up.
I'm not putting it on Netflix. No, like if
okay.
you even someone like that, they would like edit it, right? It's like you have to have full control. Like Ayn Rand would not want it to be on Netflix.
Okay, interesting. So then that's an interesting larger kind of meta question. How do you think about like cultural distribution then? How do you think about independent media? And, do you think that there is this kind of necessity for radical individuals and creators and intellectuals to really try to stay outside of the system as much as possible, have your own distribution, totally independent on all things? Or how do you think about that?
Well, I think you have to weigh up between, you want a lot of distribution because you want to have the largest impact, but you also don't want to have to change. Like, for instance, I mean, this is such a hilarious example, but most of Hollywood is under like the Writers Guild, like unions and stuff. I can't be a union production of Atlas Shrugged. It's ridiculous.
Right.
Don't take it to Netflix. They like censor the fuck out of it. I mean, not that there's anything bad, but like even the word Atlas Shrugged, you take it through Hollywood. Like most people haven't read it. And they still criticize it because they have an idea of what they think it's about. But it's actually about a female protagonist. It's actually a very liberal story if you think about it. And we really have focused on that as an unbelievable female protagonist story. She's the Hillary Clinton of the industrial age. But in terms of distribution, there are new platforms coming up, and there are things that are going to be more censorship resistant. But I'm just very ambitious. Like I'm like, money goes a long way. So when I'm like trying to fundraise for Atlas Shrugged and everyone's like, how are you going to distribute it? My ideas are very big. I want the first episodes to show for free in like every AMC in America. I'm like, oh yeah, you want to watch Atlas Shrugged? It's for free in every local cinema. And I've just a huge amount in my, it's going to cost millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars. But like, that's the level that I'm thinking. I'm like, I will beat everyone's prior, biases of this book. And it's exactly what Ayn Rand would have wanted. She would have wanted something big, impactful, and creative. I'm not going to go like beg a Netflix executives like go do it. I'm like, nah. However much it costs me, I'll raise it because the people who will understand the potential impact of this stuff will realize like how powerful it will be to like do it very well.
Hell yeah. Okay. So basically, it sounds like your meta model is go full independent, but then get distribution yourself just by getting a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, money goes a long way. Like I realized how fickle Hollywood was when especially post COVID, because like a lot of things haven't gone into production, and you talk to different people, and Hollywood has lost a lot of money, and it's I think if there's any time for anyone to do Atlas Shrugged, it's now.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, don't you think also though money is a weird conformity vector as well? Like you're right, money goes a long way, but it's kind of it's kind of sad, isn't it, when you see like someone like raises money and then everyone's like, super interested in that person who just publicly got a lot of money. So I think you're totally right. It's like a very powerful tool to just mobilize a lot of people. But in a way, it's also kind of sad because those are kind of the NPCs, right? Like they'll do whatever money tells them to do, kind of.
Yeah, but I know that my intentions are good. So in my case, I'm like, Atlas Shrugged should exist. I want there to be a next generation of builders, and how do you do that? Like, I mean, we are already living in Atlas Shrugged. Like when Gavin Newsom came on the news and those trains had been looted, I was crying with laughter. I was like, literally, I mean, Ayn Rand must be laughing in her grave. Like, it's so funny.
So
like, California is the basis of Atlas Shrugged right now. It's so funny.
So who is the most based hot Hollywood actress who would have to play Dagny Taggart?
Oh, we've been thinking about this a lot. And here's the thing. There's, as I've navigated trying to do this, there's a lot of people who, are actually, I don't really like the word based so much because it has its own connotations, but people who, have been it's not radicalized, but I can see what happened over the last few years and been like, wait, what is happening? Like, I care about California. I don't want Gavin Newsom to like drive the state into the fiery death it's going to go into. So trying to pick up on people's different political views. And I've been very surprised actually about how many Atlas Shrugged fans there are in Hollywood. Like, for instance, I didn't know this as I went into this, but before Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie got divorced, they were trying to make their own version of Atlas Shrugged, where they would play John Galt and Dagny Taggart. And I was like, that is fascinating. So it's an unbelievable book. There's almost like no one that I know who's genuinely actually read the book, which is very long, who doesn't like it. So if someone in Hollywood is smart, and there are a bunch of smart people in Hollywood, if they've read the book, like, they think it's cool. There's people who haven't read the book.
It is a weird thing. Like, I definitely read every word of that book in high school and I really liked it. And then when I got to college, it was very unfashionable. And I kind of, I kept reading stuff like Mises. I read like a ton of the Austrian economics stuff when I was in undergrad, but I had this distinct memory as a young man that it was like not cool to like that stuff. So, I wanted to get laid and that kind of stuff. So I kind of like was a closet, like Austrian economics guy in college. But I remember like there was a strong kind of like social penalty for like being interested in that stuff.
Which is why I want to do the TV show, right? It's like, no one's going to read the book. The book is trying to tell young people to read like 1,300 pages it's not like useful. They're like watching TikTok,
right?
But making a very sexy TV show that actually isn't like, it's not political or anything. It just has these archetypes of people to look up to. And they are cool and they have amazing love lives and they have amazing stories. I mean, the most powerful character to me in Atlas Shrugged is Lillian Reardon. And like these archetypes of characters are like stop progress or like put a damper on things. Once you see it in this show or in the book, you start to recognize it everywhere. Like Newsom is a classic Randian villain, right? And so is Mark Benioff, all these people. Like every time I see them, I'm like, oh, it's Ellsworth Toohey or whoever. Like I see them, right? So I just want these concepts to go into young people's minds so that they have at least I'm not saying that they have to love Atlas Shrugged, but at least I'll add to their spectrum of extremely terrible people to look up to, a few more that are a little different.
I'm very interested in this theme also of how to kind of excite and liberate the youth, how to help people, especially young adults, kind of see like how much more badass and creative and radical they could be if they just decided to. Do you, in your experience or in your observation, like are there particular interventions you think that work, like maybe some more everyday things than like doing a big movie? Is there something that you can actually tell a kid? Is there something you can do with a kid or a young adult to shake them and like break the mental shackles?
Peter Thiel used to give everyone $100,000 to drop out of college, and if you're smart now and you're a young kid, you just make that with DeFi now. So I think there are ways that just by the nature of like different systems are emerging will just happen by nature, right? That people are starting to think outside the box because you don't need to go to Harvard Business School if you figured out DeFi, right? It's like Harvard Business School is not even understanding what's happening in DeFi yet, right? So I think it's the next generation is going to be very interesting because they grew up on the internet. It's like I really only I was on the internet when I was young, like 15 plus, but I met a 14-year-old the other day who'd been playing with Ethereum for like 6 years. So, it's a very different mindset. But what can you do? I don't know. I think one of the responsibilities of the people who do work in these systems, like in technology or in crypto, is to show the young people that we're having fun. This maybe isn't so much like what young people can do, but to go back to the social network analogy, like it works to say like, hey, if you do these things, you're also going to enjoy your life. And I think that makes me sad because people make money in tech and they're like living in these minimalist houses, like fasting all the time. I was with my friend Rob Reinhardt the other day. Like he was the founder of Soylent and he lives on this ranch in Malibu and he hosts these big dinners and he came to Las Vegas with his pet piglet. Like he's such a surrealist, like soulful individual and he's like enjoys his life. We were talking about how like, the wellness stuff, like people don't eat gluten anymore. Like all of these ideas, like everyone's so restrictive. I think it's our responsibility as people who've like been successful to show that if you do work hard, it is going to be rewarding for you, right? Because I'm like, who do young people look up to? Like, I think Elon Musk is having fun. I think that he had a big change in 2016 and became very fun on the internet. So he showed that like working hard can be fun. But we've got this kind of mindset, this like Sheryl Sandberg, like all these people, just like you have to wear a hoodie every day and you have to like be very minimalist. Like it's all about just working, like, and I think it's very important that we show that it can be extremely fun and rewarding. And that there's beauty, like there needs to be more, we need to put more beauty in the world to inspire the young generations to not become like nihilists. Like they're going to become nihilists because who are they going to look up to? Like none of us seem like we're having much fun.
Hell
especially
yeah.
not on Twitter.
I mean, I'm trying to kind of synthesize your worldview as I'm getting it in these different pieces in this conversation. And it's interesting because it's like you're obviously pro technology, you're pro, you're a kind of technological progressive in a way, but you're also kind of trad, like you're not into polyamory and you're not into, a lot of the stuff that is kind of associated with the so-called transhumanist crowd that maybe you were kind of more associated with in the past. You're more into things like Kaczynski now. I feel like the Riva Tez model of the future would be something like, you do like a private charter city or like a private, city DAO with you and your friends, and you basically just select for the most badass, happy, beautiful, ambitious, energetic people, go full on into crypto rails, and basically just find a way to pretty much exit all currently existing institutions and like build your own kind of somewhat trad based like society on your own outside of the mainstream institutions. Is this the kind of stuff that you think about? Is that a promising avenue, or do you not think in those terms?
No, I mean, completely. I mean, this is my exact reason for investing in Praxis, which is, they're trying to build a city. And the reason why I invested in them, there are different groups who've pitched me on charter cities or like cities, right? And the reason why I like the Praxis guys is that they fundamentally understood that it was not about politics, it was not about crypto, it was about culture. The way you get people interested in this stuff is by making it culturally interesting. And the way that they thought about it when they were telling me about, how do we change the self-efficacy of young people and how do we make them want more? How do we build the gulch for the next generation? Isn't going to be like us writing all the value of charter cities, like blah, blah, blah. It's about, putting those concepts in and like creating a funnel for young people to like figure it out on their own and like making that this other thing look like a better option, or, it's not a rational argument. It has to be downstream from culture. So that's one of the reasons why I have been, and I'm working right now on a magazine for Praxis, because like, how do we get young people to learn about these concepts? It's got to be cultural. So yeah, it's got to seem fun. It's got to seem like people you want to go join. And the thing I love about Praxis is like they throw all these parties, right? And everyone's like, why are they throwing parties? They're a startup. I'm like, no, I think a party is extremely valuable because you say, these people having fun. Like, what are they doing? And that's a great entry point to learn about things. These young people aren't going to go read Austrian economics or like, my cat who's right here is called Milton, right? And they're not going to read Free to Choose. But if they go to a party and they're like, what are all these cool people doing? They're like, oh, we're all actually going to go work on the city. It's like, well, I want to go join that. And I think that's very powerful.
Yeah, I went to a Praxis party just last week in Austin. It was cool. It was interesting. It was very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It was very like when I was there after like 15 minutes, I was kind of like, so are they going to like try to get me to buy something now? Or are they, what's going on here? It was kind of weird in a cool way because there was nothing to sell. There was no pitch. There was just like, we're going to throw on this lovely dinner and have an excellent little party. And that's just like, that is what we're doing. And I was like, that is actually pretty creative and pretty outside the box when it comes to like strategies for building a startup. And it was really pretty cool. Well, Riva, thank you so much for hanging out today. This was fun.
Thank you for having me.